Good evening, everyone. Kalispera σας. As a Canadian senator of Hellenic descent, I'm particularly proud to stand here before you tonight on what I consider to be a very special occasion. We are here as a community this evening in recognition of a tragic period in our history as Hellenes, the Pontian Genocide. Κυρίες και κύριοι, είμαι πολύ περήφανος να είμαι εδώ μαζί σας σήμερα, όχι μόνο σαν γερουσιαστής ελληνικής καταγωγής, αλλά σαν μέλος αυτής της παροικίας. Μια παροικία που έχει υποχρέωση να μην ξεχνάει από πού προήλθαμε, γιατί αν ξεχάσουμε από πού προερχόμαστε, δεν θα έχουμε καθόλου ιδέα πού πάμε. Και γι' αυτό σήμερα είμαι περήφανος να είμαι εδώ σήμερα να μιλήσουμε για ένα θέμα που φυσικά είναι η γενοκτονία των Ποντίων. Και θέλω να ευχαριστήσω τον οργανισμό των Ποντίων του Τορόντο για αυτή την εκδήλωση, για αυτή την opportunity που με έχετε δώσει. Θέλω ταυτόχρονα να κάνω recognize Reverend Fathers, of course, γιατί χωρίς την Ελληνική Ορθόδοξη Εκκλησία δεν μπορούμε εμείς Έλληνες να καταφέρουμε τίποτα. Θέλω να αναγνωρίσω μερικούς πολιτικούς προπαντός, το Irish Babikian, που εργάζεται ταυτόχρονα και με δύναμη και με σφρίγος να υποστηρίξει αυτό το θέμα και όλα τα θέματα τα ελληνικά. Είναι σαν, όχι μόνο φιλέλληνας, αλλά συνάδελφος Έλληνας. Την κυρία Μήτας, την κυρία Καραχάλιος και φυσικά τον κύριο Τζιμ Καρίγιανης, που είναι ένας τέλοχος της ελληνικής παροικίας που έχει στηρίξει, έχει υποστηρίξει και παλεύει για τα θέματα. Θέλω να αναγνωρίσω και την παρουσία της κυρία Πακοπάνος, πρώην βουλευτής του Φιλελεύθερου Κόμμα στο Μοντρεάλ και πάλι στέλοχος της παροικίας μας. Το γενικό πρόξενο φυσικά που είναι πάντοτε στη διάθεσή μας, η όμορφη Ελλάδα και η πατρίδα μας είναι δίπλα μας σε κάθε στιγμή, την κυρία Γενικέ. Τον Αντιπρόεδρο του Ελληνικού Καναδικού Κογκρέσου, τον κύριο Χαλάτση, ευχαριστώ για την παρουσία σου σήμερα. Τον Πρόεδρο της Ελληνικής Κοινότητας, τον κύριο Αρτιμάκης, τον Ελληνιστής και στέλεχος της παροικίας και πάντοτε δίπλα μας. My friends, as a member of the Hellenic community, the recognition of the Pontian Genocide has been a primary concern for me since my early years as a young adult and a young kid. I remember vividly the talks I had, and I continue to have, with my mother, my father, about the history of modern-day Greece, its heroic struggle to establish itself as a nation, the ensuring challenges at the beginning of the 20th century. It was these talks that guided me during my studies at McGill and have helped me shape my involvement in our community, where I've had the privilege and pleasure of serving in a variety of organizations, including, as it was mentioned earlier, I was a founding member of the Hellenic Board of Trade of Metropolitan Montreal. I served vigorously as a member of the board and as vice president of the Hellenic Congress of Quebec. I had the opportunity to serve, of course, with the Canadian National Congress for years in the 1990s. This community involvement has shaped my personal, professional, and my political life, and indeed has brought me here tonight, before you. As Hellenes, we all know the history I just alluded to. We all know about the 400 years of darkness our ancestors suffered under the Ottoman rule, and how they rose up to fight like a phoenix, with dignity and honor, to make sure that our children live in freedom and democracy anywhere around the world as Hellenes. The whole world, ladies and gentlemen, should respect our history and what it signifies. The whole world should also acknowledge the truth regarding the atrocities suffered by the Pontian Greeks at the hands of the Ottoman state. My friends, about 2 years ago, I was honored to rise in the Senate to support a motion of one of my colleagues, the Honorable Senator Panna Merchant, calling on the Senate of Canada to recognize the Christian Pontian Genocide. The honor was amplified by the fact that this was a motion brought forward in unity by 2 senators of Greek descent from opposing political parties. Senator Merchant, I have to point out as well, has a very much of a personal vested interest because her roots and her family and her background are from Pontus, are from that coast of the world, that beautiful coast of the world. And somehow through the centuries, she found herself in Saskatchewan and serving in the Senate of Canada, and felt obligated to move the motion, and I felt a deep sense of obligation to second the motion. We did so as a matter of principle, and it is very much a principle. Unity, that showed and should guide our efforts as a community in this particular cause and should guide us as Hellenes in all our causes. When I rose in the Senate of Canada to speak to my colleagues about the genocide, I did so with the intention of sharing documented facts provided by the most credible sources available, including the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Brotherhood University, whose experts described in horrible detail the action of the Turkish state. One passage from the organization's archives documented how the Turks, by 1916, began singling out all able-bodied Greek men, forcibly conscripting them into labor battalions which performed slave labor for the Turkish war effort. Greek children were stolen and assimilated into Turkish society. Greek villages were brutally plundered and terrorized under the pretext of internal security. Indeed, as the Armenians, the Greeks were generally accused as disloyal and treacherous. And eventually, most of the population was rounded up and forcibly deported to the interior. There is no doubt that the actions I've just described to you fit the legal definition of a genocide as it appears in Article 2 of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment on Crimes of Genocide. Indeed, those same actions against the Armenians have been recognized as genocide both domestically and internationally, and I might add, rightfully so. However, while the Armenian genocide is widely known and acknowledged, and here I must congratulate our Armenian friends and cousins for their passionate defense of their history, we must remember that the Pontian Genocide, which occurred at the same time, remains unrecognized by our country, and that is unacceptable. This is wrong. It is a miscarriage of justice, and is high time for that to change here in Canada, as it has in other jurisdictions. One of my dear friends is an expert on the issue, an extremely respected member of the Greek community in Canada. That friend is Professor Andrei Gerolimatos from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Hellenic Studies, of course, at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. He has long advocated for the recognition of the Pontian Genocide, as he has advocated, as you know, for many of our national Hellenic issues, and has often described the similarities between what happened to the Pontic, Greek, and Armenian communities in Turkey. My fellow Hellenes, it is vital that we ourselves consistently speak of and understand the horror of what our ancestors in Pontus experienced. Therefore, I must ask you to bear with me for a minute or so in order to accurately describe, as Dr. Gerolimatos has, the horrible events of this tragic history, events that we should never forget. In essence, what we know, without question, about this tragedy is that the Ottoman genocide of the Armenians and the Pontic Greek Orthodox was aimed specifically at Christian members in an effort to create an ethnically cleansed state. Prior to the First World War, as their ancestors had for a millennia, 700,000 proud Greek Orthodox lived off the coast of the Black Sea region of the Ottoman Empire, otherwise known as Pontus. During the war, the government of the Ottoman Empire embarked on a course of reprehensible actions that led to the genocide of the Pontians, as they did with the Armenians. My fellow Hellenes, it is vital that we never lose sight of those facts. This genocide was conducted sadistically to instill terror in the minds of the surviving minorities in the Ottoman Empire. The genocide included mass rape, wanton destruction, terror for the sake of terror. Regardless of gender and age, children were raped, often in front of their parents before the entire family was put to death. Once again, husbands, wives, children were often brutally tortured prior to execution. As was the case with the Armenians, the Ottoman regime carried out these efforts to extinguish the Pontian Greeks in stages. Now, once again, I believe it's important that we remind ourselves of what happened in order to move forward, to achieve the recognition of these victims so richly deserved. At the outset of the First World War was the case when the Armenians, the Greek Orthodox Pontic men, were forced into the Turkish interior to work in labor battalions. In January 1916, the U.S. Consul General in Near East, George Hutton, described the start of the deportation of Greek Orthodox Pontians from the Black Sea in a report where he wrote, "These unfortunate human beings came through the city of Marsovan by thousands, walking for the most part during the 3 days' journey through the snow and the mud. As intended by the Ottoman authorities, thousands fell by the wayside from exhaustion. They came into the city always under the escort of Turkish gendarmerie." Those are the facts, as seen by the Consul General, the U.S. Consul General, George Hutton. We don't need an academic report. We don't need more facts than actual first-hand witnesses from independent Western democratic countries who recognize this. By November 1916, the Austrian Council reported that Rafet Bey, a senior Ottoman official, had told him, "We must at last do with the Greeks as we did with the Armenians." This is a first-hand witness, not hearsay, not casual third reporting, first-hand witnesses of credible diplomats who saw the atrocities. My dear friends, there was a slight difference between the tragic cases of the Armenians and the Pontic Greek community. In the case of the Armenian community, the actions of the Ottomans were quite open for many to see. Thousands of people were driven literally into the sea and left to die with the Armenians. What was the difference with our ancestors, with our Pontian ancestors? It seemed that the Ottomans had learned no lessons from the international outrage that their actions against the Armenians had created. Tragically, the lesson was not one of restraint on their part, but rather one of learning to carry out the atrocities in ways away from the prying eyes and away from the witnesses. The Pontic Greeks were pushed into the interior by the Turks, where these atrocities continued. In his report to Washington, U.S. Consul General Hutton described the treatment of the Pontians as, and I quote, "even more radical than a straight massacre, as such the Armenians had suffered before." Ladies and gentlemen, this is a report, one of many from senior American officials who witnessed the genocide personally, and yet we're still waiting for recognition. That's unacceptable. Tragically, the Ottomans succeeded in their goal, killing a significant portion of the Pontian people. The body count of the genocide of the Greek Orthodox Pontians was over 350,000 men, women, and children. The MC said earlier 353,000. 353,000 people out of 700,000, half the population, exterminated. The fact needs to be repeated. Half the population of 700,000 people exterminated. We must be clear that this is a tragic fate and nothing but a genocide. Not only have the ghosts of the Pontic Greek Orthodox earned the right to confront the murderers, but to paraphrase the words of a wise man, those who forget the tragedies of the past are doomed to repeat them in the future. And indeed, the world chose to ignore the genocides of the Armenians and the Pontians, and then we were forced to confront the Nazi Holocaust of the European Jews as a result. We've ignored Rwanda, and more recently we've had to deal with the genocides of the like of the Yazidis being carried out by ISIS. Κυρίες και κύριοι, τα γεγονότα που σας περιγράφω είναι πολύ σημαντικά. Είναι σημαντικά για μας, είναι σημαντικά για τις ψυχές που έχουν χαθεί. Και σαν Έλληνο Καναδί ελληνικής καταγωγής, έχουμε υποχρέωση να περιγράψουμε την πραγματική ιστορία στους συνάδελφους Καναδούς, πολιτικούς και μη πολιτικούς. Γιατί αν ξεχνάμε, επαναλαμβάνονται στο μέλλον τα ίδια λάθη, δυστυχώς. Γι' αυτό έχουμε αυτή την ιερή υποχρέωση να δουλέψουμε στιματικά, ενωμένα, δυνατά, με σφρίγος και να μην αφήσουμε αυτόν τον αγώνα μέχρι να καταφέρουμε την κυβέρνηση του Καναδά, τη Βουλή του Καναδά, τη Γερουσία του Καναδά να αναγνωρίσει αυτό το σημαντικό γεγονός. Η κυρία Merchant και εγώ κάναμε μια μικρή πρώτη προσπάθεια στη Γερουσία, δυστυχώς απέτυχε. Απέτυχε για λόγους δύσκολους φυσικά να περιγράψουμε σε έναν λόγο, αλλά η πραγματικότητα πρέπει να λέγεται και νομίζω πρέπει να τονίζουμε στους πολιτικούς που δεν στηρίζουν τα εθνικά μας θέματα ότι μόλις έρχονται στη στιγμή και η ώρα να πάμε στην κάλπη θα θυμηθούμε. Και πρέπει να μην ξεχάσουμε πάλι ότι αυτή η πρόταση που καταθέθηκε με χωρίς πολιτικό σκοπό εκ μέρους εμένα και η κυρία Μέρτσεν δεν ήταν θέμα να δημιουργήσουμε πολιτικό ζήτημα, ήταν θέμα να αναγνωρίσουμε ένα σημαντικό ιερό γεγονός. Και η πραγματικότητα είναι ότι όλοι οι γερουσιαστές, ούτε ένας γερουσιαστής του κύριου Τρούντο, γιατί στην πραγματικότητα σήμερα μας λέει ότι οι γερουσιαστές που έχει διορίσει είναι ανεξάρτητοι, αλλά δεν βρέθηκε ούτε ένας από τους 49 να υποστηρίξει την πρόταση και το λέω αυτό με λύπη. Υπήρξαν συντηρητικοί, υπήρξε ένας φιλελεύθερος που πρέπει να τονίσω το όνομά του, ο κ. Serge Royal, γιατί γι' αυτό δεν ήταν θέμα ούτε πολιτικό, ήταν θέμα αισθηματικό. Ήταν ο μόνος από το φιλελεύθερο caucus που σηκώθηκε και υποστήριξε αυτή την πρόταση και πρέπει να το τονίσω αυτό. Friends, as I mentioned earlier before, she has retired, but my friend and colleague Hannah Merchant and I tried to pass nonpartisan motion to recognize the Pontian Genocide in the Senate of Canada. And it's worth repeating what I just said in Greek. Unfortunately, the motion was voted down by the Trudeau-appointed senators who claim to be independent. This is a travesty of justice and a denial of historical facts. And we should not accept that the Canadian government will kneel and bend to Turkish lobby over recognizing the souls of the 353,000 Pontians that fell. No government, I don't care political colors or stripes, should ever bend down and kneel down in the face of defending principle, human rights, and fundamental principles of this nature for anything, not for trade, not for geopolitical reasons. And as the elections roll around, each and every one in this community, we have an obligation to work hard in order to get the Pontian Genocide recognized. And I call on my colleagues who are of liberal colors, my colleagues who are of the conservative colors, which I share as a member of the Conservative Party, NDPers, we have to go to the politicians before the next election and plead our case. And make our case loud and clear that the Greek community wants this principled view expressed, recognized, defended, and without a doubt, and without an inkling of a doubt. It deserves to be recognized in the Senate, deserves to be recognized in the House of Commons, and more importantly, it deserves the Prime Minister of Canada to recognize the Pontian Genocide. Now let's be clear, when we asked the Senate to recognize the Pontian Genocide, we did not ask Canada or Canadians to sit in judgment of others, and we aren't seeking to undo anything of the past. Quite the contrary. What we seek is an acknowledgement of an important historical period that will allow a process of healing to begin, and perhaps more importantly, for this acknowledgement to serve as a tool for education, and in so doing, to hopefully prevent such atrocities from happening again. This last fact is what is so upsetting about the actions of Trudeau-appointed senators. The Prime Minister has, for his own reasons, acknowledged many atrocities from the past. Indeed, he has acknowledged, on behalf of all Canadians, all of us, for many grievous errors committed by Canadian governments and others historically. How then can we not acknowledge the genocide of over 353,000 Pontian Greeks? My fellow Hellenes, this fight is not over. Ο αγώνας συνεχίζεται. Ο αγώνας έχει μόνο ξεκινήσει. I want you to know that I remain committed to our cause. We must continue to sensitize and educate our political community leaders to the issue of the Pontian Genocide. And that is the obligation we all have. Οι προέδροι της κοινότητας, ο γενικός πρόξενος, οι αντιπρόσωποι του Κογκρέσου, βουλευτές σημερινοί και πρώην και μελλοντικοί, όλοι μας εμείς οι Έλληνες που πονάμε τα εθνικά μας ελληνικά θέματα, έχουμε υποχρέωση σε καθημερινή βάση να τα προωθούμε και να τα προωθούμε με δύναμη. I stand before you this evening and I will state categorically that I will continue to do my part as a member of the Canadian Senate and a member of the Conservative Party. Rest assured, I have discussed the genocide at length with Mr. Scheer, and I have his full support. I had his full support when I worked on the motion to recognize the tragedy of the Pontian Greek genocide in the Senate. And rest assured, I will continue to work with our community leaders to be a voice in the media, in our caucus, in our Senate, wherever possible, to discuss what we all know to be the right thing to do. And we will not rest until we get it done. Εμείς δεν πρόκειται να μείνουμε ήσυχοι και δεν θα το αφήσουμε αυτό το θέμα μέχρι να αναγνωριστεί. Ζήτω η πόλη, ζήτω η Ελλάδα, ζήτω η Παλαιστίνη, να είστε στο πράγμα της καλά και δυνατή. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.